All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Let me go ahead and change my view real quick. Perfect. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Trum, and I am really excited to have you here. Today, we're really going to be doing three things. I want to really start and talk about what it means to really love ourselves, to like really be honest around what it means to love ourselves. Number two is, why is it that most of us are holding back when it comes to giving more and pouring more into ourselves? It's no accident that so many of us struggle with self-care. And we're going to talk about that and really talk about why this is the issue that it is. And then finally, number three is, how do we become more intentional? How do we put into place the steps to become more intentional when it comes to taking better care of ourselves and loving on ourselves? So those are really the three objectives. And then with that are going to be the tips that I'm going to provide that are really going to help you lay that foundation that is going to allow you to become more intentional when it comes to how you care for yourself and how you love on yourself. So with that, what I would like to do is start off by sharing my screen. So I'm going to get to that right now. Screen. Do-do-do. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So again, welcome. And thank you so much. I'm combining things. Welcome and thank you so much for being here. Again, my name is Jen Trum, and I've been in human resources now for about 22 years. I started in 2000. And I also am now a certified life coach, and I help women who are in HR, who struggle with self-worth and confidence, issues. And one of the things about me is that I really truly believe in humanity. And I believe that everybody has a purpose. And that, our ultimately my goal, my purpose is to help others, is to help other people recognize their value and their worth to be able to start reaching for and moving towards their own purpose. So what we want to do today is really talk about how can we start being more intentional when it comes to taking care of ourselves. And one of the things I wanted to start out with is a chart that came out a few years ago that if you've been on any other webinars with me, you'll recognize it, but it's one that I think is very much worth repeating. So let me get to that chart. Okay, so if you're able to see your screen, this is a chart that has been over the course of the last almost 20 years. And what this chart really shows is that over these years, we have seen an incremental increase in things that are considered negative in nature, right? The experience rating in surveys this comes from Gallup. If you've heard of Gallup surveys, they do surveys every year throughout all over the world. And basically what this survey asks is getting general impressions of how people feel about their lives, whether they feel as though they're happy and thriving or whether they feel like they are unhappy and really struggling. And across the board, they are seeing increases in stress, increases in worry, increases in anger, and what else, and sadness. And one of the things that I think is really interesting to point out with these results is all of these things come down to our emotions. They come down to reactions that we have emotionally about circumstances that are in our lives. And so the reason why I point this out, and actually, let me go to the next slide too, to just kind of show you, because it goes even beyond 2018 on this one. I wasn't able to do the deep dive on how much is stress and anger and this and that. But generally speaking, you can see that increase has kept going up over the last several years. No huge surprise, right, with COVID and everything else, but to really get that big picture that this goes way beyond COVID, right? There is something that is really happening around us that I think is important to address. Mental health in the United States, I know, is a huge, huge issue, especially depending on what geographic area that you live near. And so this presentation is really, I think, my way of helping to point out to each of us that we all play our own part when it comes to our health. And I think that we are so accustomed to look at our physical health and whether or not we are eating the right things and drinking or not drinking the right things, doing physical activities to take care of our physical bodies. But one of the things that I think we really neglect, and if we're being really truthfully honest with ourselves, is self-care when it comes to our emotional lives. And what I have really come to realize is it's our own self-care when it comes to our emotions, our stress, our overwhelm, our worry, our doubt. It's the self-care when it comes to those emotions that I have truly noticed for myself have been significant when it comes to being able to thrive. And so what we want to do today is have an opportunity to really talk through, I think, what I've experienced myself and what research is showing more and more and more, which is really that self-care, the taking care of ourselves, the putting in the time to take care of ourselves.
I need to check it first. I wrote it's. I have a.
Oh, hi there. Would you mind?
Sorry, love. I didn't realize I wasn't muted. Sorry.
It's okay. It happens. I should force mute next time. That's on me too. So research has been showing time and time again the benefits of taking care of ourselves. And what I have personally realized over the course of the last just 12 months in my life is that the additional benefit that you receive by pouring into yourself more and being more intentional when it comes to self-care is self-love. So let me explain what I mean by that is, along with all the other benefits that you've heard so many times before, one of the most significant benefits that you will receive when you start becoming more intentional about taking care of yourself is a falling in love with yourself, which truly ultimately is the most significant way you will ever be able to give back the in the greatest way in your life is when you are taking care of yourself from a place of love and compassion. And so let's talk a little bit about HR and self-care. So there was a study not too long ago from SHRM, and the good news, I'll start with the good news, is that according to SHRM, many of us, most of us, really love what we do. We got into HR for all the right reasons, most of us. Some of us got in by accident, but many times it was because we are people driven, right? We are individuals, so many of us anyway. I'm generalizing, but generally speaking, I think the heart of why we get into HR is solid. And what is so incredibly fascinating is, as much as we do care and love what we do, there are so many of us who struggle with taking care of ourselves. And not only that, we struggle with recognizing why the taking care of ourselves is so significant in the role that we play. Right. So when you think about the role of human resources, and this is something truly I did not really realize until after I got out of HR. And now I'm back in HR, which is a whole nother webinar. But basically, when I left human resources and started coaching and started working with people who struggle with confidence, struggle with imposter syndrome, struggled with all of the things that I had struggled with for 20 years, I started to realize the trend that every single one of the people that I was working with struggled with self-care. They struggled with really recognizing why self-care mattered so much when it came to how they felt about themselves. And so now we're starting to see the research behind it, that when you are in a people service type position like human resources, the care that we take for ourselves is actually so significant when it comes to our ability to be able to serve at the highest level. And so realizing that after I had left HR was really, really fascinating. And now being back in HR, I serve in a whole different way because I now can really recognize that the taking care of myself, the making sure that I am a priority first and foremost, allows me to be at that fuller cup. Now, I know what so many of you are thinking when you think about self-care and you think about time and energy and all of those things. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I know when I was in HR before, I had all the excuses, right? Like everything you can possibly imagine of why I wasn't making the time to take care of myself would always find their way of getting in front of me from being able to make the right choice or being able to make the choice that deep down I knew I wanted to make, and that was taking care of myself. So next screen. So let's talk a bit about this. So I've come to really realize that there are 5 reasons that I think we talk ourselves out of taking care of ourselves. The first one is self-care feels selfish. Like when you think about the time that you would need, right, to take care of yourself and spend that time on pouring into yourself, it can feel as though it it it's a selfish thing to do. Like, I need to do this and I need to do that. And when I finish this and when I make that, sure, that's happened. And the list can go on and on and on, right? Which is exactly what I suffered from. But ultimately, it comes down to a belief, I think, that we've had, and many of us have had, that's been wired inside for pretty much most of our lives, which is, and especially for women, you guys, oh, would you mind muting if you wouldn't mind? Thank you so much. So, which really comes down to, for so many of us women, is being raised from the perspective of we must serve before taking care of ourselves, right? That was our mothers, that was our grandmothers, that was our aunts, that was, that's what we have experienced throughout our lives. And so this feeling, this kind of almost ickiness, you know what I mean, around taking care of ourselves, that's really where that comes from. And so one of the things that I do as a coach is really help you question those beliefs to say, well, wait a second, is that really truly what you want to believe, that self-care is selfish? Or is that something that's just been wired in you since a very, very little girl, that you've now kind of still have, and it gives you uncomfortable feelings whenever you think of taking care of yourself, but ultimately it's not a true belief. It's really something that maybe we've carried with us throughout our lives, which there's more on that later. But the second one is, again, a belief that self-care must be earned, right? This is another one that is a deep belief many times because of the role models that we've seen throughout our lives, that we must earn it. We must make sure everything is done. We must make sure that we have gone above and beyond in every way in our lives in order to finally get that deep breath, right? And I want to challenge that. I want you to challenge that, because I think what we end up doing to ourselves is causing us so much extra suffering in our own lives because we have chosen to believe something that actually isn't true. Actually, to earn something should be inherent. right? Like you as a woman, as a person, as someone who can recognize in the times in her lives where in her time in her life where she might need a little extra support or she might need a little extra encouragement, that should never be something that we have to earn, that we have to go above and beyond for. We should always feel empowered to be able to take what we need. And this is going to be a foreign thing for many of us. But I can tell you, and I promise you, one of the paths that will lead you to self-love is learning how to better speak up for yourself. And that's going to come up here and when we start getting into our tips. So next is the no time and no energy. I give the cat. And I say that because I hear it over and over and over again, right? No time and no energy to be able to take care of myself, to be able to do the things that maybe I need to do to better care for myself. And my challenge to you is that if you believe deep down that you truly matter, right? That why you've been put on this earth matters, then I will challenge you all up and down that the no time, the no energy, really any excuses that we have around self-care is probably BS. And I say that because that when we, and there's so much research and studies on this, but when you really sit down and when you calculate the amount of hours in our day, the amount of time maybe we might be on social media, that we might be watching TV, right? So there's so many things we are doing, and yet we are procrastinating on many of the things that we know that we should be doing. And that, I think, is one of the things that I can help most with my clients through coaching, is be able to start to listen to our spidey senses, to listen to our instincts when they say that you can do more, that you're meant for more, right? And you know that it's there because it'll nag at you. And so when we oscillate back and forth between, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough energy, that, all the other excuses come up. And then through that true instinct within your soul, that that you are meant for more, that battle between the two is going to eat at you. And one of the things that I've really learned over the course of this last year plus that I've been doing coaching and that I've been learning these concepts is it's only going to be you, right? The only person who's ever going to get you from this place of excuses, 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 and not moving forward to actually starting to move towards the person that you can become is going to be you, is going to be starting to put those boundaries in place, and the kind of the systems in place, which is really why we're here today, is to say, hey, you know what, I recognize that I have been holding myself back. I recognize that I am meant for more and that I can do more. And that I recognize that it all starts with how I treat myself. Right. And that's really what self-care is all about. That's really what all of this is all about. It comes down to how we treat ourselves. Are we taking care of ourselves when the warning signals are going off? Or if we have to power through at different times in our lives, are we coming back to ourselves and making sure that we're caring for ourselves? Or are we just continuing to plow forward? And I know for myself, after years and years and years of continued cycles of burnout and overwhelm, that I can tell you that what I used to do is, as soon as I got through a time where I was struggling with burnout or overwhelm, as soon as I would get through that low period, I would just push right through it and continue to forge ahead without really listening to and paying attention to why the burnout was there in the first place, to understanding why our overwhelm is there in the first place, to understand why we're so out of balance, and maybe really starting to pay attention to how we can make those small and maybe large changes in our own lives so we can begin to change the trajectory of where we want our lives to go. So the last one on here is many times we're not engaging in the self-care that we know that we need to engage in because we're so distracted by the indulgences. So I say unhealthy indulgences, and then at the very beginning or at the end, you'll notice I put exercise with some question marks. So exercise in and of itself is not an unhealthy indulgence. It's not like drinking, it's not smoking, it's not drugs, it's nothing like that. It actually is an activity that's incredibly healthy for you. But where exercise, food, drink, TV, social media, anything else that we use as an activity to help us get away from feeling the discomfort that we might be feeling or thinking about the things that are making us uncomfortable. So, for example, stress throughout the workday, stress throughout the work week, and the only thing that we want to do when we get off work, I know for me, it used to be, was grabbing a glass of wine and making sure I was checking out as soon as I crossed over the threshold into my house, right? And I think we all have something. I think if we're being very honest and sometimes brutally honest with ourselves, what is that something? What are we doing to check out instead of actually caring for ourselves and spending that time with whatever emotion is causing us such stress, such overwhelm? Because I can promise you there is something, and it doesn't help to push it down or distract away from it. Yes, it allows it to not be there for a little while. But one of the biggest challenges that we face in our lives is if our goal is ultimately to continue to grow, continue to evolve, continue to want to become better versions of ourselves, it's never going to happen by distracting ourselves from our emotions. And so, with that, I want to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about that. So, let's talk a little bit about why we are the way we are. So, if you've been in one of my presentations before, you know that I like to talk a little bit of science. I'm a little geeky, a little nerdy, but it's so important to understand the science around why we are the way we are, right? And our brains are very, very intelligent. And when we start to understand how intelligent our brains are, we can understand that just as you and I have physical habits that we do all the time without even thinking, right? We tie our shoes, we brush our teeth, we even drive our cars sometimes without even paying attention. And all of a sudden, we're like a few miles down the road, like, oh, how did I get here? Right? Those types of habits that we do not pay attention to, those habits actually exist when it comes to mental habits. So our brains are so incredibly intelligent that we have many mental habits. And when I say mental habits, what I'm referring to are the thoughts that we have, the beliefs we have that are on repeat. And so what that means is there are things that you think about yourself. There are things that you think about others around you. There are things that you think about your work and your job that are repeating themselves. Sometimes those repeated thoughts and beliefs that you have are going to be positive. Many times, the thoughts and beliefs that we have are not positive. And so, what ends up happening is we're not really paying attention a lot of times to the thoughts and beliefs and things that are coming up in our heads. On average, there are different studies out there, but on average, we have up to 60,000 thoughts in any given day. That's a lot of thinking, right? There's no way you're going to be able to keep up with all of that thinking. And so, if some of that is habitual and you're not paying attention to it, that could be a problem. The other thing that data and science has been showing is that as humans, we have a negativity bias, right? And so what that means is we as humans tend to think things more negatively. So when we're presented with situations, there's been study after study on this, where you're presented with two possible alternatives. Time and time again, people tend to veer towards seeing those alternatives more negatively, or choosing the alternatives that tend to view their perspectives as being more negative. And so, what that tells us is, unless we are actively paying attention to what it is we're thinking about when we're presented with new circumstances, our autopilot in our brain is going to immediately, more often than not, go towards the negative, right? New people, new circumstances, new experiences, new changes at work, whatever it might be, right? That's going to be the natural go-to for your brain. So one of the things that they've been finding in science is the reason why this is because our brains have been evolving for thousands of years, right? And as our brains have been evolving, it has come so far in really being able to have three primary motivations as your brain, which again is so incredibly smart and intelligent. And it's what had helped us survive for thousands and thousands of years. And so those three primary motivations of our brain is, one, to avoid pain and discomfort, right? We're going to do that no matter what. And I think we are super conscious and aware when that avoiding of pain and discomfort has to do with physical pain, right? If you have an inkling that you might experience physical pain, we're immediately on guard to that. I believe that we're also very on guard when that pain is emotional. And so being aware and alert to that, I think, can be a tremendous gift that we can build within ourselves, to know that our brain's natural tendency is going to want to avoid that emotional pain. And so that can include so many different things, right? It can include stress, it can include any kind of discomfort, it can include sadness, it can include overwhelm. So you think of anything that your brain is going to immediately try to avoid just based on its natural tendencies. Then you have the motivation of seeking pleasure and enjoyment. So your brain immediately is going to be drawn towards things that give it pleasure. And that's why at 5 p.m., when you're just, you're here after a full day of maybe, thing after thing being thrown at you, I get it. I totally get it. The only thing that really would feel good in that moment is checking out immediately, right? And you can understand a little bit more why that is when you understand that that's a natural motivation of your brain. That's gonna be the go-to. And so you have to learn to train your brain not to immediately have those go-tos that then distract or avoid from the emotional discomfort. The third one is exerting as little energy as possible. So again, your brain is super smart, and that's why we have the mental habits that we have. We can tie our shoes without thinking, right? Our brains are so incredibly intelligent, and exerting as little effort as possible means it doesn't have to think anymore about the thoughts that you have that are not good for you. The thoughts of not being good enough, the thoughts of maybe not belonging, the thoughts of, feeling as though you may be an imposter and have to have this mask and a charade, right? All of those, very possibly and likely for many of us, I know for me, for so many years, we're on autopilot. And so that is really your brain functioning completely normally because that is what it's motivated to do. You as the human who can be smarter than our sneaky smart brains are going to have to find a way to interject into that. So that's really what, why we're here today, and what I think you can really gain from this presentation. Okay, So let's talk again a little bit about emotional self-care. So I believe, truly believe that this all comes down to how we care for each other, how we talk to ourselves, and then also how we respond to ourselves. And so we have to learn as humans that as smart, as intelligent as our brains are, there's a part of being able to grow and evolve that's going to require intentional human effort. And that is only going to come from you. And it really starts from your awareness of understanding why this matters so much, why your intentionality when it comes to emotional self-care matters so much, and how it leads you towards greater self-love and self-care. So with that, let's get into my the 5 tips I created. And what I want to do real quick is just share with you where and why I created these 5 tips. So, over the course of the past year and a half, I took the leap and left human resources to start and jump as a life coach. And when I did so, I learned so much. I mean, just from the matter of learning how to be an entrepreneur, right? And learning how to market yourself and learning all of those things. But what I think I learned most of all is that in order to truly be able to help people, in order to truly be able to give the gift of helping others find the best version of themselves, it required me to do the work myself, right? And that's what I mean when I say that I'd learned so much after leaving HR, that I'm so happy now that I'm back in HR and being able to recognize that my own care for myself meant those that I serve are going to get such a better version of me. And so that being able to actually experience the importance of putting in the work myself allowed me to now be able to come back and speak to people who want to be able to grow and involve themselves in a way that can help you see what it where you start, and I think that that's for me one of the hardest parts about all of this. It's like, yeah, I want to take better care of myself. Yeah, I'd like to be able to feel more love for myself, but how do I start? Like I showed earlier, the reasons why we're not doing it. How do we actually start to chip away at making progress in this? So that's where these 5 tips, I think, come in. So, the first tip that I want to share with you is what I call non judgmental awareness. So, when you are very honest with yourself, how hard are you on you? And what are the stories that you have about yourself that you'd like to change, right? Because that's the awakening that I think I had for myself. And it didn't happen until, again, I left HR. But the awakening really came down to, wait, who's in control here, right? Who's really in control of your thoughts? Who's really in control of what you believe about yourself, what you believe about your potential to change, to improve, to grow? And at the end of the day, we know, we know deep down, that it's you. But here's the catch. And here's, I think, where it becomes so difficult for so many of us is when we start to get judgy about ourselves. Right? And that's where this whole process, I think, can become such a double-edged sword for many of us. is the desire of wanting to change and grow, the awareness of why we might want to change or grow. But unfortunately, where we end up finding ourselves repeatedly stuck is the judgment that we have towards ourselves, the judgment that we are not where it is that we think maybe we should have been. I know for me, that was a biggie, right? Like I'm one of those majorly late bloomers, late bloomers. I started in college thinking I was going to do liberal studies. Then I thought I was going to do psychology. I'm trying to think which came first, but it was psychology, liberal studies, or one or the other. Then I dropped out for several years from college. And it wasn't until I was working for a company and I was their secretary at a tax firm, and they wanted to start doing benefits. And they started handing me all of these things, which ended up being, HR related, that I got into HR. And when I finally did get into HR and finally had an opportunity to get my bachelor's, I will never forget, by that time I was in my mid 20s, right? And I remember that I had a boss who was really pushing me to get an MBA. Had said, "Oh no, Jen, you definitely should try to do that. I think it would be, you'd be great." And I was 100% like convinced in my head that one, I was too old, and two, there was no way. There was no way I was smart enough to be able to get an MBA. There was no way that, I'd be able to compete with other people in an MBA program. So I immediately judged myself before I even gave myself an opportunity to try. And I could give you hundreds of other examples of my own life. And I know so many clients that I've worked with as well who start to think about what's possible, who start to think about what is possible in their own lives, and immediately start to find judgments around themselves around why they don't think it is possible. And so I really want to challenge every one of us when it comes to really challenging ourselves on what is possible, but two, learning the skill of compassion when we start to become hard on ourselves for what we're not, what we think we should have been, what we think we might be too late for, because I truly, truly believe that we're never, ever too late to make a change in our lives. We're never too late to start making a difference and start moving in a new direction. And anybody who questions themselves in that area, I'd love to give you some free one-on-one time, because I think those types of doubts, those types of beliefs that we have about ourselves, that we might be too late, we might be too this, too that, or whatever, those types of judgments and beliefs are so toxic, and they are holding you back. Because if you have one that's sneaky and you're holding on to, there's no doubt that there are others that are probably holding you back as well. And becoming aware of those, becoming aware of the things that you tell yourself that keep you stuck, that keep you held back, I think is can be such a huge breakthrough. But you have to do so and also learn that process of non-judgment, because recognizing it and becoming aware of it can be a tremendously valuable step forward. But if we do so in a way that, again, judges ourselves, is hard on ourselves, we'll find that it really doesn't actually give us the benefit that we're looking for, and instead can hold us back possibly even more. So it's important to balance that awareness with that non-judgment, and even being able to hold space for that compassionately and saying, hey, you know what? Those are the mistakes I've made in the past. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And I think now that I do coaching, I was meant to have all the mistakes that I was meant to have. And I believe that you are meant to make the mistakes that you've made a mistake. You just don't know why yet. And that's okay. It's a matter of like just being okay with what brought you here, but then also being very intentional about not wanting to stay here. That's it. That's it. That's all you need in this first step. All right. Tip number two. Number two, I call mind the gap. And I think we have to be really careful when it comes to the gap between where you are today and the gap of where you and where you want to be, right? Like ideally where you most wanted to be. And I think, again, that self compassion, that ability to be able to be there for yourself, to have your own back, to know that you are worth it through this process is so, so incredible to be able to do for yourself. And it's important to know that the wiring that you have within your brain is not your fault, right? It's nothing that you've done wrong. And the more that you can remind yourself of that, right? Think of yourself as like almost a student and we're learning something new. And the only way it's going to stick is through repetition. The only way it's going to stick is starting to bridge that gap, right? To build the bridge between where you are and knowing that some of these old thoughts and these old stories and these old beliefs are holding you back. The only way you're going to start building it is building the new thoughts and the new beliefs. What do you want to believe? And then we got to start practicing it. We got to start working it into your everyday because that is what starts that progress forward. So again, it comes without judgment. It comes without criticism. It's not the easiest thing to do. And it is something that I think helps so much when you are able to do it with a coach. Because when you try to go this route alone, and I can tell you from personal experience, if I had an opportunity to do all over again, I would have somebody guiding me 100%. I think this can be a very difficult part of the process because it requires a lot of humility within yourself to be able to own what you need to own, but move on, let it go, and continue to move forward. For every step you take, it's one step towards your dreams. And so that's why never, never allowing yourself to get stuck in that place of not believing in yourself, to not believe that you're not capable of being able to move in the direction you want to move ever again, right? To ever again get to the point where one of the things that I think is like wild is as a society, we've accepted the belief that we're our own harshest critic, right? Like, how many of you have heard that before? I think everybody, right? We hear it all the time. Oh, I'm just my own harshest critic. Why do we buy into that? Right? Like, why do we buy in that that's okay? And why do we allow ourselves not to be empowered or recognize our own personal empowerment to change that narrative? I think it's wild. It's really interesting. And I actually heard Matthew McConaughey not too long ago talk about that. I was like, well, wait a second. Who's our own biggest critic? Me? No, I don't think so. Right. But that's going to require this recognition that one, there is a gap. There's a gap between all that self-criticism and all that negative self-talk and being able to get to a place where you no longer are going to allow that from yourself. That as soon as you catch it, you're going to nip it and think, that's not me anymore. And you're not going to be judgmental and critical of the person that maybe you used to be that didn't know any better. You're going to instead say, hey, this is not the way that I talk to myself anymore. And then just catch it every time. You just catch it. All right, next slide. This next one is so massive to me and such a like wild thing that so few of us have ever really been taught before. So, one of the things that I have really been just blown away about as I've learned my brain more and understood how my brain works is the concept of your thoughts are not your emotions, right? And I think so often when something happens, there's an external event that happens outside of us, we tend to very quickly have an emotional trigger to that. If, let's say, there was an accident right in front of us, whoa, an emotional trigger is going to happen immediately, right? Stress, fear, overwhelm, all of these things that's going to cause our blood, to start pumping, our heart rate to start going. All of these things happen without even a moment's notice, right? So, one of the things that they're finding in science is that when we have an event that occurs, there is a gap, again, another gap between the moment that an event occurs, the thoughts, whatever we might be thinking about that event, and then the emotions that come from whatever has arisen. And one of the things that I have just really found fascinating is that we, as human beings, actually always are in control of this. We're always in control of whether or not our thoughts are going to create the emotions that are going to best serve the situation. And this can be a very interesting one for many of us to swallow, right? Because I am so sorry for those buzzers. I apologize for that. But that can be very, very difficult for many of us to digest, is that ultimately our emotions are completely the product of what we are thinking. And so when we are in a negative place, when we see circumstances as being negative, we see our coworkers, we see our managers, we see whatever the circumstances are in front of us. If we view those circumstances, if we have thoughts or our beliefs around those circumstances are negative in any way, then chances are that those negative emotions that we might be having about whatever's in front of us are going to cause us to not be to not take action from a place that best serves us. So I want to give a little bit of an example on this. If you've heard me speak before, you might have heard this fable before, but there is an old fable that is called The One You Feed. And there's actually a podcast on this. And if you haven't heard the podcast, it's so good. But basically, the fable is that there is an old man and his grandson. And the old man is telling his grandson that he has two wolves inside of his brain. He has a good wolf who is all about kindness, peace, generosity, love. And he has a bad wolf. And the bad wolf is about jealousy, it's about fear, sadness, worry, doubt. And the wolves, the good wolf and the bad wolf, are in constant argument with one another. They're continuously battling each other, right? The good and the bad, constantly in the brain. The grandchild then looks at his grandfather and he says, "Well, grandfather, who wins?" And the grandfather says, "The one you feed." And the reason that this is so important is that we ultimately are choosing what we feed. And when we continuously are feeding the negative thoughts that continue to feed into the negative emotions, it's no wonder that so much in our life is not where we want it to be, because we are allowing things to continue to hold us down. We're allowing whatever is being fed in our minds to only continue to grow and continue to become more and more intensified. And so when we can start to learn that the emotional triggers that we have when things happen around us are truly only energy. And so when we can start to become more intentional around separating what we're thinking about from what we're feeling and the energy that is happening in our bodies, we can start to learn how to become very intentional with our responses and actions. That we're never taking an action from a place of an emotional energy that is not going to serve a situation. And this is not easy. This is not easy for many of us because we're so easily triggered. Go back to that graph at the very beginning. We as society in the United States and just about every single country in the world are easily triggered. Triggering is within our control. And that, I think, is one of the biggest bombshells that I really learned that just blows my mind that is not yet really truly being taught in our educational system, is that our emotions and and look, part of this is common sense, right? Like we know deep down that we are in control of our emotions. But what I think that we struggle with as humans is really understanding that we're in control of our thoughts. We're in control of what we believe. We're in control of what we think about. And that, I think, is the breakthrough that can help change everything for you. Because when you start to understand that there is absolutely an opportunity to start to learn how to see the trigger of the events and the circumstances that happen to us outside of us are really just the beginning when it comes to how we can learn to have greater intention around what we do and how we react. And being able to recognize that whatever comes up for us emotionally is not anything that needs reaction to, that we can allow the overwhelm and the fear. So let me take the example of getting into a car accident or having a car accident happen to you on the freeway. If you've ever had that happen to you before, it's really scary, very overwhelming, very intense, right? My energy is like through the roof. And in that moment, the best you can do is just get through it, right? You might have to change and exchange insurance information. There's all kinds of things that we are literally in a fight or flight moment in that situation. And so I think at various levels, it's almost like a continuum, right? We are constantly having different things happen to us throughout our day that is causing us to have little bits. Sometimes it's at varying degrees. Sometimes it might be like this, and sometimes it might be like this in terms of how fight or flight comes up in our bodies, right? How the emotional energy comes up in our bodies and recognizing it's there and then making a conscious choice on whether or not you're going to take action from that place. And that is really why the one you feed and why it's so important to recognize those little moments of control that we can begin to take. All right, I better rush through. I need to hurry and make sure we have time to get through this. So, Robert Downey Jr. So, this next tip is really about like recognizing that you're human, that recognizing that you're not perfect and owning that and being okay with continuing to show up for yourself, even though you've made mistakes in the past and you're gonna make mistakes in the future. Just be intentional. And when you can choose to be intentional about caring for yourself and doing the things that you know are going to help you along your own path, you will start to see those deposits. Sometimes it's going to take time. And I was just talking to a client about this the other day because it can be tough when you're going to, let's say you're going to a gym because you're wanting to get in shape for some kind of run that you're wanting to do. Going to a gym can be challenging for some people when they're wanting the intention of losing weight, right? Because it's not going to happen right away. You're not going to go and have that 30 to 45 minute workout and leave and say, okay, now I'm 5 pounds lighter. It takes time. And that is really one of the things you can learn the most, I think, from taking care of yourself is you're not going to see results overnight. You're not going to see your results even right away or in a week or even a few weeks. Sometimes it's going to take time. Rewiring that we have had in our lives that have caused us to think negatively about ourselves, believe negatively about ourselves, and not love ourselves the way that we know we'd like to has been there for a long time. And unwiring that is also going to take a long time. So don't give up on yourself. Be intentional about showing up for yourself, regardless of what happened yesterday. Know that you're not perfect. Don't judge yourself, but continue to show up tomorrow. All right. The last tip that I have is what I call the ABCs. So we've talked a little bit about each of these when we've gone through the other slides, but the ABCs of self-care and self-love, number one is advocate for yourself. If there are things that you really know that you need, if there are things that you're not saying and you're not speaking your truth, that, my friend, is slowly killing you, right? When we are wanting to kind of put on what we think others expect of us and we're not being honest with ourselves, that's what creates burnout. That's what creates overwhelm. That's what creates us to then lose our spark and lose our passion because we're not advocating. And so if you believe that you're not being heard at your company, with your boss, in your career, then that's a whole nother conversation. And I think if you're voicing what it is that you know deep down that you need for yourself and you're not getting it, I would love to connect with you for a one-on-one because I would love to help you with how you can learn to find your voice. And it may just be somewhere else, to understand that you may not be in the right place for you. Number two is believe in yourself, to have your own back no matter what, and say, you know what, I was put on this earth for a reason. I may not know what that reason is yet, but I know that I'm here and I'm here for a reason that is to serve. And with that knowledge, with that like inherent understanding that you have value, that you are worthy, and that you can believe in that, that I think is one of those things that it does take time, but it's one of the greatest gifts that you can ever give to yourself. And so if believing in yourself is something that you struggle with, believing in who you are, what you are, the value you add, I'd love to help you out. I believe that we all have so much value to add, and it really starts and ends with whether or not we believe it. Last one is challenge yourself. Have the gumption to push yourself, to know that habits that you have created over the course of your lifetime are going to take time to reestablish. And so if you struggle with self-care, if you struggle with nagging thoughts that are not serving you, then those are things that are worth your time and worth the creation of new disciplines to be able to shift you so you can start being able to invest in yourself. So I think, it's important that we know that the only way we're ever going to get from here to a place where we're really loving on and caring for ourselves is really to put in that commitment and say, damn it, I'm worth it. I am worth my own commitment to myself and the value I give to me to help ensure that I can give the best to the world around me. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I would love if you are in HR and a woman in HR, if you wouldn't mind, I would love the opportunity to share with you a program that I am offering that I think could really help those that are stuck. Anyone who struggles with believing that they're enough, anyone who's struggled with feeling like an imposter and feeling like you have to wear a mask. The program I'd like to share with you is really one that can help break free from so much of that. So, real quick before I get out of this, the QR code here is the a way that you can reach me. So I'd love for you to be able to connect with me, and we can go from there. And oh my gosh, I just realized it's 1 o'clock. Oh my gosh, I'm going to stop sharing. I apologize. So we are kind of at time. So what I'm going to do is I will connect with you all, and I'd love to be able to share with you information about my program called Alive to Thrive. And hopefully, what I'd like to do is offer every one of you who are on the call or watching this recording a free personal one-on-one coaching session. So I'd love a chance to just meet you, get to know you, find out how I can help and serve. So I will connect with each of you with a link to do that. And with that, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you being here. I hope you were able to learn a little something, something. And I hope to be able to connect with all of you soon. So thank you so much and have a great day.